Hello everyone, so this is Verity Raphael from Hi Bob here, and I just wanted to give a very warm welcome to everyone who is tuned in today. So before we get started with Katie, who is our Head of UK Marketing here at Hi Bob, and she will be talking with you all about team motivation, collaboration and its effect on happiness. Just to give you a little bit of context about what we do and who we are. In a nutshell, Hi Bob is a next generation HRIS with people, culture and user experience at the forefront of everything we do. Now, Bob also runs the HR, talent and culture community, which allows us to share our ongoing industry findings with our peers and clients, and also just to learn from you guys in return. So things like the webinars and the events, they're really a chance for you to kind of upskill and meet with like-minded professionals. So moving on to the webinar, we have been doing a lot of work and research this week about happiness at work week and how motivation actually ties into that. So the most exciting part of it is that we've kind of been exploring outside of the boardroom as well, to get some of the top motivational tips. And we've actually been speaking to a sporting professional to share those with you today. So without much further ado, I am going to pass you over to Katie, who will be talking with you all about team motivation.
Hi, thank you, Verity. I'm Katie. I head up the marketing and communications function for Hi Bob in the UK and Europe. And a big part of my role here is to conduct lots of different research into what creates great people functions and how that can help companies with talent acquisition and retention. I'd also like to say thank you for joining this morning. Just the amount of people that we have dialed in and registered for today's session really does prove the value that businesses are starting to put behind motivation and happy employees, and that's really reassuring. You should be able to see on your screens that there's a little box for asking questions. So if anything crops up as we're going through the session, do feel free to pop your question in there and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the session for you. As Roti mentioned, this week is Happiness at Work Week, and we've been looking at people-focused topics that matter the most to us as a business, and what really stands to make a difference to overall performance and success for employers and employees. And of course, at the top of that list was well-being, unsurprisingly. Well-being is an unavoidable topic in all businesses these days, and that's brilliant. It's not new news, it's widely acknowledged that businesses are increasingly focusing on well-being as part of the overall business strategy. And that's great, but there's certainly still lots of discussions to be had around what well-being actually is and how far an employer's duty of care needs to go. Of course, well-being is also a very broad topic that could incorporate absolutely everything from Friday drinks to mental health first aiders. So we dug a bit deeper into this and we broke down the overall topic of well-being into two obvious categories, the physical side of things and the mental side of things. And then we had a little look at the micro and the macro environments, or the micro and the macro factors, sorry. And we've looked at this from an employer's perspective. So when we're looking at the micro factors here, these are all the elements that can potentially be controlled within the workplace or by the managers of an employee. And then the macro factors are those things that are outside of our control, but can still potentially affect the physical and mental well-being of our employees, of our team, so things that we still need to be aware of. Of course, it's worth flagging that these boxes could have been filled 10 times over, but we've just tried to pull out a couple of the most common bigger issues that have been cropping up. Obviously, again, the micro and the macro environments have the ability to impact hugely on multiple aspects of people's personal and professional lives. But the interesting thing for me, and of course the topic of today's webinar, is the fact that any single one of all of these factors listed here has the potential to derail a person's motivation, which then, of course, has the potential to affect those around them. Even if you have the most motivated team going, there's still the potential that one person loses that motivation and then others around them start to become frustrated, resentment starts to grow, and it can have a knock-on effect to the absolute whole thing. So the question here is that if motivation is such a fragile beast that can change at any time by factors completely outside of our control, why should we even bother trying to manage it? Well, we know that motivation genuinely stands to make a huge difference. And we've got some stats here to show you this. 68% of workers who class themselves as being overloaded see a massive dip in productivity, which is of course due to a lack of motivation. And 39% of workers say that they would work harder if they are happier and feel more motivated within their place of work. So there's some real numbers backing the importance of motivation, of course. And as human beings, we know that motivation is important. We know the difference between feeling a bit rubbish about what we're doing and feeling really encouraged and really valued, and how that impacts what we deliver. And of course, it is possible, if we're looking on the bright side, for the positives to override negative elements. So if you can create a motivational environment with multiple opportunities for teams to thrive, those negative micro and macro factors are going to have to work really hard to derail the positive ones that you create. And because we want to look at what it is that makes successful and high-performing teams motivated and pushes them from that extra mile, as Roti mentioned, we decided that the best place to start was actually outside of the boardroom and onto the sports pitch. So we've had the pleasure of working with this amazing woman, Michelle Rocky Clark, MBE, who is the most capped rugby player internationally, more so than any of the male players, and she's represented England multiple times. Rocky hasn't been captain for England, but she has been a leader on the pitch, which in itself is quite an interesting factor and something that we will look at as we start to work out what elements of motivation are the most important and what can we actually action in place. So I spent quite a lot of time chatting with Rocky and understanding how high-performing sports teams are built, how they bond together, what makes a successful team different to a team that's not doing so well, and how can you manage the feeling of motivation at those inevitable times when things aren't necessarily going to plan. The results can be broken down into three quite clear sections. Motivation really comes from inspirational leaders, and Rocky's kind of real top tip here is that an inspirational leader is someone who leads from the front. In her words, it's someone who's prepared to take the first hit on a rugby pitch, but fortunately for us, that's not always necessary in an office environment. But there's of course the business equivalent of it. So somebody who's willing to stand up for their team, share the responsibility, share the blame, and really lead from the front, get others to follow them. Unsurprisingly, alignment appears on there massively. Not just alignment between managers and their team, but also alignment within the team. Everyone knows that feeling of being a bit unsettled when you're not sure what other people are working on. Are they doing more than you, less than you? Who's working harder? So being very clear about what everyone's role is within the team, what everyone's working towards, and having mutual respect for what each other bring to the team is unsurprisingly incredibly motivational and really important, and something that's quite easy to achieve. It just comes back to communication. And my favourite one, it's of course the whole balance between work hard, play hard. And that's not necessarily running to the pub as soon as 6 o'clock comes, but it's about celebrating wins together, commiserating together when things don't go quite to plan, taking that all-important debrief, making sure we've learned from what goes wrong, and working out ways to have a little bit of fun along the way. And of course that comes down to knowing what fun looks like for different people within your team. For some of them it might be yoga, for others it might be shots on a Friday night. So finding that right balance and knowing what personalities you've got is incredibly important. So to take a bit of a deeper dive into each of these sections, let's start with leading from the front. Of course, we all know, not new news, that a level of top-down understanding is key. If you don't have a C-suite or a board that embraces the idea of culture, motivational environment, and making sure that everyone feels valued and equal within the business, this is going to be much more of a struggle to achieve. We have a resource centre on highbob.com that's got loads of tips on engaging the C-suite and getting them to champion culture. And we've actually just done a really exciting research piece with 300 C-level execs about how culture is being talked about at board level that we'll be sharing with everyone soon as well. So getting that top-down understanding is, of course, step one. However, it doesn't quite stop there, because even when you've got a C-suite or a CEO that agrees culture, motivation is really important, they'll give you a budget for it, they're going to give you some resources for it. Unfortunately, what tends to happen next is that CEO, that champion of culture, can often sort of sit back and wait for this amazing culture to suddenly pop up around them, not necessarily realising that they are going to be the magic ingredient that makes it happen. Going back to the sports pitch as well as the boardroom, what we're seeing from all our research, hearing from our clients, hearing from our rugby players, is that CEOs who make the change and start to build that culture they want to see are the ones that end up with these successful business cultures, benefiting from staff retention, better talent acquisition, and of course less recruitment costs. So C-suite involvement is the magic ingredient for creating motivational cultures, not just having them understand that it's important, but having them get involved with it. And we could get a bit deep and metaphorical here by examining what culture actually means and how and if it can be created. Is it Friday afternoon beers? If so, how do you get people to spend extra time in the office with the same colleagues that have been stressing them out all week in order to drink those beers? And what about the non-drinkers? Or is culture more about flexible working, working from home, getting those policies right and getting people out of the office more? Is that what's going to motivate them? However you look at it, and however you decide to build your company culture to create your motivational environment, your initiatives are always going to run the risk of upsetting someone, because we all know it is impossible to please everyone. And there's always going to be a certain level of politics involved, unless you can crack this second point here of getting that C-suite involvement, getting the CEO leading from the front, and really making them the culture champions. And once the C-suite has become involved, it makes it a little bit easier for everyone else to come involved. They're going to follow suit. They're going to do it just because the CEO is doing it and they feel they should, and then they might learn to enjoy it afterwards. So what happens after you've gained that C-suite involvement is that you need to look at your next management level down. So you've got your team leaders who are all very busy and leading very good teams. In order to have a strong team, we need to take a strong structure. And this is where we're going to go back to some advice from Rocky and what happens on the rugby pitch. So what she explained was that when they're playing a match and they will take the main teams, the two teams that are on the pitch, and then they'll break them down into further teams. So they actually have, on the England rugby squad, 4 individual units, each with their own leader and their own clear purpose. So each team breaks down into 4 teams, and each part of that team knows exactly what their role is and what they're working towards. If you're not managing a particularly big team, if you're in a small business, those 4 units can even be individuals. But as long as everyone knows what their goal is and how it all joins back up together, you've got a really high-performing, functional team that are all working towards one common goal. And what we know is that one of the biggest obstacles of motivation is not knowing why you're doing the job you're doing. So as soon as everyone knows what they're working towards, a huge barrier has been overcome. So creating the right structure for your team is the first step on that motivational ladder, certainly. And again, if we look at it from the other side, instead of trying to make a team of potentially 15 people, if we're going to stick with the rugby analogy, work towards the same thing and follow the same instructions when you've got lots of different individual personalities within there, breaking it down into 4 separate units or however many separate units suit you allows you a bit more flexibility in building the right environment for a smaller group of individuals, so it can be more tailored and more beneficial. if you are going to have separate leaders within your team, alignment is more important than ever. So your leaders and your coaches need to be completely aligned. Whoever it is that you've got managing your individual units needs to have complete respect for each other and understanding for the overall team leader as well. Part of that alignment should also be the ability to adjust as you go along. So you may have a plan, a team plan, a project plan, whatever it is that you're working towards. If at any point you start to feel it isn't working, don't think that you have to stick with it anyway and keep pushing forward. That's going to start making people feel like they're failing or that they're flagging a dead horse, which no one wants to do. So you need to be able to adjust along the way. And sometimes here, you might want to introduce the idea of micro chats, whereas instead of getting everyone into a meeting to constantly talk about what's working and what's not, look at the smaller parts of the project plan that people are working on and are finding obstacles as they're moving through, and get them to have micro chats around what could we just change on this one section or in the next half an hour that could make a real difference to the end goal. As soon as someone feels like they're making progress again and are on a winning streak, of course, motivation rockets and everyone's back to where they should be. So we also want leaders to listen to other leaders that are slightly outside of their team or their immediate department. This again comes from Rocky's advice on what happens on the pitch, but for me this was one of the most important things that came up in our conversation. The idea that if you're very close to a team or a project, your view is quite narrow. You can see what's happening in front of you, but you can't necessarily see what's happening around it. So checking in every now and again with other managers or with your sub-team leaders who are perhaps working on different parts of the project and getting their thoughts on how it's going could really help you notice something that a close-up view would have caused you to miss. You don't have to take everyone's advice on board just because it's given to you, but from a motivational perspective, being able to look outside of your immediate team and your immediate task to see how things are going from an external perspective can sometimes be the real difference between a team that's feeling motivated and working towards a winning objective than a team that's starting to flounder slightly as they go along. And I think this last point here, it's not new. This is something that we all know we should do, but again, it's something that is easy to forget when you're in a very busy mix of things and you're trying to crack on and get things done yourself. If you know that you've got somebody within the business, and there's always one that has crazy ideas and constantly wants to come and suggest something to you about what we should be doing from a HR or a people perspective or how this department can run better, it's sometimes easy to dismiss these people and just send them away to save time and to stop having to manage expectations. However, one of the really interesting things that Rocky mentioned was that sometimes the best training plans of the season come from the craziest ideas. So if you start dismissing ideas along the way, you might miss out on something that's going to make a complete difference to your team, to your project, to your business. So to move on and to look at the idea of aligning managers and peers together, again, no new news here, but communication is always going to be key to success. Alignment comes from communicating, from knowing what everyone's working towards, from knowing why you're working towards it, and from understanding how what you're doing, what your team is doing, what any team is doing, fits into that bigger picture. So in order to have that understanding, they of course need to understand what the bigger picture is, what the common company goal is, and what the business as a whole is working towards. So get everyone on the same page with understanding company objectives, their role in it, their team's role in it, and each individual role within their team. You then need to get everyone to the mindset where they can embrace agility. And this is going to be a tough ask to get to this point. But when you've got a team who is ready and prepared to make changes and adapt and work in an agile way, you've actually overcome one of the biggest hurdles there is to motivation, which is change management. Everyone fears change in some way or another. We don't like the unknown. But if you can have a team that's got the mindset of expecting change, being ready for it, and seeing it as something that's actually going to help them succeed rather than hold them back, it's going to be handled with a lot more energy and enthusiasm, people are going to take less time to fight against it and really embrace the idea of moving in an agile way. This was a point that I really liked that came again, of course, from our sporting friend. You can't move goalposts. Once you know what you're working towards or what your parameters are, what your business objectives are, they're probably going to stay as they are. But you can change the goals along the way. So if it looks like you are going to miss a deadline for reasons completely outside of your control, the market changes, the economy changes, whatever it is, you can start to create smaller goals that will still help people feel like they're succeeding, even though that the end picture might not quite bring in the results that you were hoping for in the first time. So to bring it back to the rugby pitch, which is what I'm going to do quite a lot along the way of this presentation, how Rocky shared this one with us was that if in the middle of a game they were being beaten 50-0, they knew there was no way they could win it back, they'd start looking for other successes instead. So can we just get one goal in the next half an hour? Can we just push the team back a little bit? Can we have a bit more possession of the ball? And then if you can achieve those smaller, shorter targets, you're still working towards something and you're still feeling motivated, and you're going to come off that pitch or out of that project feeling like you do have an element of success, which makes it much easier to build the motivation back up. And going back to what we were talking about earlier with taking advice from outside of your department and tying in with other leaders, other managers, creating an alignment between your managers is also going to be key to aligning peers. So even if you are working in different departments, making sure that all managers have the same objectives, the same tasks, and are in agreement about how the business should be moving forward, creates almost like a sea of calm underneath them. Because once people feel that there's stable leaders in place, they're quite happy to work underneath a team that's working together. There's always going to be loads of elements that we can't control, like those macro factors that were outside of the employer's remit. So only focus on what you can control. Go back to the micro factors, look at what you could do within your offices that might just help someone have a slightly better day than it would if you hadn't made that change. And then let the rest go and talk about it openly. Talk about the fact that there's going to be hurdles and things that come up along the way, along a business's trajectory to success, that might change, that we have to let go of. And then go back to the idea of bringing in smaller, shorter targets that everyone feels like they're working towards something achievable. Quite a simple point here, but quite a good one. Make sure that teams know each other within your business. And whether you do this when people join, new starters, getting them onboarded and introduced to other members of their team and other departments, or whether it's something that you do a bit more regularly, which is probably the best way to do it, confidence and teamwork are going to come much more from people who work closely together, and that happens better when you know who you're working with. What do they do out of work? How do they work well? What motivates them individually? And how can, as a team, we all motivate each other? And of course, another key point that we will come up against at some point is address team issues immediately as they occur. So some of the research that we've done recently told us that one of the biggest causes of workplace stress was having bad relationships, either with managers or peers within the workplace. And bad relationships don't happen instantly. You don't come into work one day and decide that you hate everyone unless you're in a really bad mood. They tend to fester over time. And that's because it's much easier to ignore smaller issues when they pop up. And no one's got time to be dealing with all these personnel issues. But if you don't, if your managers within your business aren't trained and encouraged to address personnel issues or relationship issues as soon as they can see them starting to crop up, you're going to have much bigger problems as you go along. Motivation comes to a complete standstill, and teams stop working together because there's too much friction for everyone to be achieving this common goal. So, moving on to the fun bit, the work hard, play hard side of things. There's lots of discussions, of course, in team bonding and socialising. We all know that there's benefits to it. We know that once a team has had a good night out together or has gone off and done some team building, has spent some time together, you see a different side of that team. You see them working much closer together. There's more respect for each other. However, getting budget to take your team to the pub or to send them all off to a forest to build a treehouse can be quite a hard battle to fight. So it's worth trying to measure in some way how team bonding actually increases value of the bottom line and helps what you're delivering and helps people to deliver more things quicker. And it comes back to motivation. The easiest way to do this is, of course, to get your CEO or someone from your C-suite, one of your directors, directly involved with it so that they can see the before and after. However, you can also use various technology. Another research piece we've just done showed us that 78% of companies are now benchmarking culture or aiming towards measuring culture in some way. And of course, a lot of that measurement will come from the idea of teams that are socializing together as well as working together. To go back to Rocky, who is going to be our expert in this field for motivation, she actually was adamant that the most successful sports teams are the ones that spend more time together outside of the pitch. And she's also said that one of the ways to make sure this happens is to get your CEO, to get your manager, to get your director to be the first one at the bar so that it encourages the rest of the team to follow suit. It's also worth looking at the underlying psychology to team bonding. And a really good way of doing this is with personality testing. So there's various online systems that you can use to work out who within your team is, you can either have it as different colours, so who are your reds, your yellows, your blues, or you can do it as elements, who's wind, earth, fire, water. And what that will tell you, once you know which kind of category your different team members fit into, is what's going to motivate them, what's going to help them work well, and from a management perspective, how do they like to be communicated with? It will also help you balance your teams. If you've got a team that's all full of reds, that's a fiery team. That's going to be difficult to manage. If you've got a team that's all full of blues, that might be a bit too relaxed. So finding the right balance and making sure that you've got all the elements covered within your teams is going to not just help with you understanding how to motivate individuals and get them working towards common goals, but it will also keep the team itself fairly equal, fairly level. Which of course ties into knowing your people, knowing what they like, knowing what motivates them from a social perspective. Don't give them beer if they prefer bananas. Don't take them to a yoga retreat if they'd rather go to a disco. And those personality tests will help a little bit with that. But the best thing you can do there, of course, is ask the question, do a pulse survey, do a climate survey, understand what people regard as a treat, what's going to make them come out for a Friday night with their colleagues. And then, of course, give them a reason to get there. So if they've hit a milestone, if they've finished that project, if they've achieved that target, give them the night out they deserve. And that's going to tie, of course, back into leading from the front. Make sure that it's not just the team being sent out on their own, but the managers are there celebrating their success and bonding with them as well. Because we work for a HR system, this is just a little bit where I'm going to let you know that there are modules within Bob itself that can help with some of these things. The getting to know your teammates. We have a clubs view element that lets each of your employees list off the things that they like, the things that motivate them, the superpowers that they have. And it lets all of the company see that, so you can find your like-minded people or you can balance your teams. There are lots of other ways of doing this. Of course, you don't have to just use Bob. I've already mentioned surveys. That's a great way of finding out about your team. You can use spreadsheets to manage it. And there's other software out there as well. But Bob is a great way to know your people and to communicate what different personalities you've got within your business. You're never going to get away from the fact that data will be your key to understanding who you've got working for you and what motivates them. Data, of course, sits behind everything we do these days. You can't get away from it. And it's going to help you get the right budget signed off for different things as well. So if you can go to your CEO and you can say that, do you know what, 70% of our company really like yoga, we should invest in a yoga class every Thursday morning. That's going to motivate people to come in earlier on a Thursday morning. It's going to make them feel like you're understanding who they are, what they like. And the other way, if it feels like 80% of your people like tequila, make sure that you've got some of that sitting around an office for after work on a Friday night. But understanding who you've got, what they like, and what's going to get them working all comes from collecting the right data at the right time and being able to use that data to learn about your team. The other thing that's worth bearing in mind, again, it's not going to be rocket science here, motivation will, of course, naturally dip and peak at various points within an employee's life cycle. And for each part of the employee life cycle, there's various things you can do to just keep an eye on the motivation levels, check in, and make sure that if anyone is coming to the end of that cycle, if they are getting ready to leave the business, and there's not really very much you can do to motivate them anymore, the challenge becomes different. It's not about making that person feel motivated to work as hard as they possibly can during their notice period. It might be damage control. It might be making sure that they don't send out knock-on waves of demotivation to the rest of their team. And if the sensible thing to do seems like letting them end their notice period early, let that happen. But definitely keep an eye on the various points at which team members are within that employee life cycle and what the knock-on effects might be to those around them. And do they need something a little bit different in terms of motivation rather than people who are just starting out? There's no one-size-fits-all solution, as if there, it'd be lovely if there was, wouldn't it? Motivation is always going to be different to every single person within your organisation. You can group quite a lot of them together. There's going to be a lot of people who like the same things. There's going to be a lot of people who are motivated by the same things. But it's always, your success in terms of motivating teams is always going to come back to the idea of knowing who you've got working for you, what they like, what motivates them, and how they like to be communicated with as well. I mean, we've discussed the fact that communication is a really key factor when it comes to motivation, but communicating in the right way is the only way that you make that successful. One of my favourite quotes from Albert Einstein, I think, is the best way of summing up the importance of understanding the differences within people in any organisation and knowing that different people are going to react in different ways to different initiatives. We can't all be fish on bicycles, or we would never be motivated to do anything in life at all. So just to sum up, where does motivation come from? How do we make teams motivated? How do we get them all working towards the common goal? I think my favourite idea from the research we've done, from looking at it from a sporting perspective versus the boardroom, is this idea of sharing the burden of leadership. If you've got one team leader who's got a huge team, everyone within that team is going to start feeling like they're not necessarily getting the leadership or the support they want. If you can share that burden, if you can introduce sub-leaders, if you can give them smaller tasks to do and fewer people to motivate and to understand, you're going to see a lot more success. Know your people, do that personality testing, understand who you've got there and what's going to make them succeed. Work hard, play hard, don't blame people for being a fish on a bicycle, and use some system, whether it's spreadsheets, whether it's surveys, whether it's Bob, but to measure, track, understand where the peaks and troughs are in terms of delivering results, and allow for ongoing feedback. So that's it. Thank you very much. I think we have a few questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Katie. That was a really insightful webinar, and we do have a few questions that have come up from our listeners. So first of all, I have a question here, which is, as an HR manager, how do you get other leaders to listen to each other?
Wow, isn't that the million-dollar question? I think it's going to really come back to all the different things we've discussed here. And one of the first things that you're going to need to talk about with those leaders, those leadership teams, is the roles and responsibilities of each one of them individually. I think sometimes with leadership teams, we've all seen it, there's a bit of a blur between where one department stops and another starts. And sometimes a kind of a desperate need to hang on to a bit more responsibility, and leaders want to add as much value as possible, which is great. But if you can really clarify which team or which leader is responsible for which elements of the business, and everyone's very clear about their role, you take away the elements of competition, and you can then start to build them up as an equal team of peers rather than people who are trying to outdo each other. And that sometimes really helps with the listening. The other thing to do is give them time and space in which they can listen to each other. So perhaps book in a monthly, quarterly, weekly leadership meeting. Make sure that there's an agenda so that everyone gets the chance to speak and be heard. And make sure whoever's chairing that meeting is someone that they all respect. You know, HR is a great person to chair that meeting. and make it very clear that we are there to listen to each other, we're there to learn from each other, and we're there to help each other achieve that common goal.
Brilliant. Yeah, I really like the idea of putting everyone more as peers rather than leaders with kind of conflicting ideas. So yeah, and actually on that same vein, someone else has actually come in and asked maybe more from an employee point of view. How do you get peers, perhaps as in employees, to listen to each other? That was something that you mentioned in the webinar.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be along similar lines, really. A lot of the problems around listening and being heard comes from a lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities. Each person in the team has a job to do and results to deliver in one way or another. And once that team all know who does what, who's responsible for which elements, and what you're all working towards together, so establishing a common goal, clarifying roles and responsibilities, and giving them a safe space to talk and to be heard, is going to really encourage people to listen. But it is, going back to all these elements, a team that's well bonded, a team that's socialised together, that find a bit of respect and fun with each other outside of the office, are just going to naturally listen to each other more because they get on better. And a team that understand what value each person brings to the table is again going to listen because they know why everyone's there and what they're all working towards.
Brilliant. And I think that that kind of actually summarises everything we've spoken about really nicely as well. So thanks for that. Another question that has come in is, can you recommend any online personality tests?
The best thing you can actually do, so I mean, there's a number of free ones you can do online, so it really depends that how much detail that you want to get out of this. If you just want to get a very top level view, literally type into Google personality testing free version and you will get quite a big list come up. Find the one that's best for you, for your company, and there's lots of paid versions that you can do as well. It's hard to recommend one because I've done a few myself, and it really does depend on the business that you're in and what you're trying to find out about your team. So before you select your personality testing software, the best thing you can do is have a clear goal of what you want to get out of it. So do you want to understand how to communicate with your team? Do you want to understand how to get them to communicate with each other? Do you want to know what types of personality you've got? And then what are you going to do with those results? Are you going to use it to balance teams? Are you going to use it to brief managers? Make yourself a little bit of a plan as to what you want to achieve with your personality testing software, and then just flick through a couple. It's worth trying a free one to start off with. There's one called People Maps that tends to work quite well. But the best thing you can do is just check through a couple and find the one that's right for you.
Absolutely. And I think this applies to all wakes of life. The personality test can be extremely useful. So that's great advice, Katie. So I've had a couple, just to kind of finish up, I've just had a couple of questions. There seems to be a bit of a running theme here about how to get senior colleagues and leaders and C-suite to kind of listen to your HR initiatives to kind of improve on collaboration or to kind of be open to change?
Yeah, and I mean, this is a question that we actually get quite a lot of our events and off the back of a lot of our webinars. I think the good news is that we are seeing this is changing, and we've just done this big piece of research that tells us CEOs are very open to hearing about HR and culture initiatives. However, the reality of that is also quite different, and it's going to be about managing change. So I would recommend actually going onto the HiBob website and having a look at the webinar we did in September, which was around change management. It was delivered by a consultancy called Unleashed, and they went through some really great tips on how to get the board, get the C-suite to understand the impact that changes have on the business and how HR can help with that. But to look at it the other way, so how to get the C-suite to listen to you as a HR manager, I would start by doing it the really old-fashioned tactics of putting time in their diary, booking in a meeting. It's very hard for someone to say no once you've put half an hour in their diary. But once you do get that time, make the most of it. So go in with a really clear agenda, let them know in advance what you want to talk to them about, tell them why it's important, and try to have some data points to back you up. So if you want to talk about culture initiatives, some of the best data you can go in with is your current churn rate of employee and your current recruitment costs. When you can show that you're actually losing money by not having the right culture in place to retain your people or to acquire new talent, understandably, the C-suite becomes a lot more open to hearing what we can do about it and how we can change the environment that you currently have. So have some data, recruitment costs, current churn rate, have a plan, and be bold enough just to go ahead and put that time in the diary.
Brilliant. I think that's some really clear, kind of tangible advice that we can all take away. So thank you for that, Katie. Just finally, someone has actually recommended a personality test as well called Crystal Knows. So feel free to go and check that out. And I think on that note, that's a really nice place to finish. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel very inspired and very motivated now to go and finish my day. So thank you so much for that very clear advice and inspiration, Katie.
Thank you.
Lovely. So what we'll do, by the way, is we will send a recording and some key takeaways in an email. You'll get that in the next couple of days. We've got a couple of other events coming up as well. In fact, there is a webinar on Thursday about how to kind of bring values, purpose and gratitude into the workplace. So you can, if you're not already registered to that, you can sign up on our website on the events page. And that is with a wellbeing guru called Suki K. Bassi, who we've worked quite closely with. She's absolutely wonderful. So hope to see some of you there and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Bye.